Hey guys, tonight we drift into a time when the sky carried secrets and messages flew on wings. Quite literally, you're not riding a jet or scrolling through an app. No, you're in colonial India, when the fastest way to get a message from Bombay to Madras might just involve a bird. You're standing on the banks of the Ganges at midnight, the moon hanging low, thick mist curling like incense around the wooden docks. Somewhere upstream, a courier boat is struggling its way toward Calcutta. But up above, a homing pigeon cuts clean through the sky, silent and unseen. You're probably wondering how this ever worked, and honestly, how it didn't all go terribly wrong. Well, it did. A lot. You'll hear stories of pigeons outracing trains, crashing during storms, and even causing financial chaos. You'll meet a few aristocrats who took it all far too seriously. And yes, by the end, you might just wish we'd stuck with birds instead of inventing group chats. Or maybe not. You probably won't survive this story without occasionally shaking your head. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time down below. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of the river. It smells faintly of wet clay and wood smoke. A steamship huffs gently nearby, the water licking the sides like it's hungry. The city of Benares sleeps behind you, the old temples casting long shadows across the alleys. A young Indian boy, barefoot and wide-eyed, stands beside a British officer in full khaki uniform. They're watching a pigeon with a red cloth tied loosely around its leg flutter up into the air and vanish into the haze. There's a tension in the officer's stance. You can tell he's skeptical. A pigeon? Really? And yet, he'd already tried sending the same message via horseback courier and the telegraph. One arrived late, the other didn't arrive at all. Victorian India, for all its steam engines and British pride, is still a logistical mess. The rail lines are thin, the roads are worse, and monsoons have a way of making rivers go missing or explode overnight. And then, the pigeon returns. Not the same one, of course. That would be silly. But from across the riverbank, a second bird comes flapping down onto a bamboo perch. Its feathers are damp from mist. It bobs its head, waiting. A handler rushes over, fingers trembling slightly as he unties the string. The message? Delivered. Before the steamship even reached the halfway bend in the river. And that's when you realize something odd is happening. The British Empire, with all its cannon fire and crisp uniforms, might actually be impressed by birds. And not just any birds, homing pigeons, trained by Indian handlers using whistles, perfumes, and patience that would make a saint cry. Historians still argue whether the use of pigeons was ever officially endorsed as part of the Raj's communication network, or if it remained a curious side project indulged by eccentric civil servants. What's certain is that experiments began sprouting across India in the mid-1800s, often sparked by frustration at the unreliability of telegraph lines, which had an annoying habit of failing right when you most needed to send a message to Delhi about, say, a rebellion. Now you're following the officer up a narrow hill path where the air grows fresher and the night noises louder, crickets chirping like 1,000 tiny typewriters. At the top, you reach a makeshift aviary, bamboo poles, twine, cloth tarps, and the gentle rustle of feathers. Dozens of pigeons blink sleepily from their perches, necks shimmering green and violet in the lantern light. One old trainer sits cross-legged on a mat, sipping weak chai. He doesn't speak English, but the look he gives the officer says, "I told you so." Next to him is a ledger, yes, an actual notebook, where every bird's departure and return time has been logged, with surprising precision. You learn that pigeons can be trained to fly dozens of miles, sometimes more, returning to one specific perch they recognize as home. The trick is in how they're raised. Always fed in one place, always released elsewhere. You're not sure about the nobility part. One pigeon currently pecking at a crumb near your boot looks more like a grumpy loaf of bread. But hey, who are you to judge? Back on the river, the officer's steamship finally chugs into view, hours behind schedule. He checks the message in his pocket, glances at the pigeon, and then at the stars. Something has shifted. This isn't just an experiment anymore. It's a rivalry. By the time you're back in your makeshift camp, the birds have quieted. The old trainer is already asleep, snoring softly beside his birds. And you, lulled by the hiss of lantern light and the scent of oil and feathers, close your eyes too. Because tomorrow, the real race begins. You wake up to the clatter of hooves on uneven stone and the distant screech of train wheels breaking into a halt. The sun isn't quite up yet, but the air has already started to thicken with heat. You're in a postal depot, if you can call it that, on the edge of a dusty colonial town somewhere between Delhi and Bombay. Piles of wooden crates, canvas bags, and half-torn telegram sheets are scattered in chaotic patterns that only the depot master seems to understand. Somewhere under one of those bags is your breakfast. Probably. You walk the floor, carefully dodging a disgruntled goat that's made itself entirely too comfortable inside the sorting room. Around you, young Indian workers, barefoot, quick, overworked, shuffle armfuls of letters into labeled bins. Calcutta, Madras, Agra, Allahabad. You squint and realize they're organizing by train route, by river connection, and by guesswork. There's no computer, no phone, not even a consistent map. Just intuition, routine, and an overburdened system inherited from centuries of royal couriers and British improvisation. And it's not working. You step outside and watch a mounted messenger gallop off with a small leather pouch tied to his chest. His horse is lean, but tired. He's headed for a fort 70 miles away, and you're told he'll be lucky to get there by nightfall. If monsoon rains, don't wash out the road first. That same message, were it put on a pigeon, could be in a captain's hand within 2 hours. Maybe. Victorian India, in all its grandeur and mismanaged ambition, is facing a problem. It's too big, too hot, too unpredictable, and too analog for its own good. The British Empire stretches its limbs across jungles, deserts, mountains, and deltas, but its messages crawl. Messages from one province to another get delayed not by war, but by cows blocking a road, by telegraph lines snapping in the wind, by an overworked clerk falling asleep mid-sort and sending a note meant for Kanpur all the way to Karachi. Historians still argue whether the delay in communication contributed to some of the great miscalculations of the Raj: uprisings not spotted early enough, famines poorly managed, or political appointments approved weeks too late to make a difference. But what everyone agrees on is this: speed mattered, and the colonial system wasn't delivering. You ride the train now, one of those narrow-gauge beauties, with teakwood trim and iron wheels that sings against the rails. Inside the carriage, fans creak overhead, and passengers fan themselves lazily with folded newspapers. You're sharing a bench with a missionary, a spice merchant, and a very rotund officer with a ginger mustache and an alarming snore. The train pulls out of the station like a reluctant elephant. It's romantic, in a sweaty, clunky sort of way. Hours later, you're not much farther. The train has stopped 4 times. Once for a herd of buffalo, once for tea, once because the driver wanted to buy mangoes, and once because someone forgot to check the signal lamp. Meanwhile, a pigeon released from your departure station has already reached the next town, delivered a message, and is probably preening itself smugly on a windowsill. You glance over and realize he's got a sealed envelope with red wax in his lap. Confidential military order, perhaps. That's the problem. The system is stuck in its ways. Outside your window, the countryside flickers past in slow frames. Rice paddies, banyan trees, women balancing baskets on their heads, and small children waving as the train trundles by. It's beautiful and frustrating, because for all its charm, you realize the empire runs on something perilously fragile: time. And that's where pigeons start to matter. You recall that curious day when a single bird beat not just a courier, but an entire railway line. It was in the region between Madras and Nellore, sometime in the late 1860s. The British had arranged a demonstration. More a dare, really. Could a pigeon deliver a message faster than a train? The bird was released at 6:03 a.m. sharp. The train departed at 6:05. Both were headed to the same colonial post 80 miles away. You already know the outcome. The pigeon arrived 22 minutes earlier. The station master who received the message was so surprised, he dropped his teacup. It shattered. A goat ate the biscuit that had been sitting beside it. This wasn't an isolated miracle. It started happening more and more. Officers began placing private bets. Traders sent urgent news to port authorities using birds rather than risking a telegram that might get delayed. And in regions where the telegraph hadn't yet arrived, or had been accidentally chewed by monkeys, yes, that happened, pigeons became lifelines. You disembarked the train near dusk, covered in dust and slightly sunburnt. Your destination was a mere 60 miles from where you started, but it has taken all day. A boy meets you at the platform, holding a small envelope. It's the same message you saw sealed hours ago back on the train. "How?" you begin. "Pigeon," the boy says and grins. You squint at the envelope. Same seal, same handwriting. Well then, this is getting serious. Somewhere pigeons are already roosting in bamboo lofts, above markets and police stations. Government inspectors are taking notes. Rumors swirl of an official trial program. And you're starting to wonder if this feathered revolution might just fly. You find yourself now in a small town south of Madras, where the humidity clings to your skin like a second shirt, and the smell of cardamom floats lazily from a tea stall. But you're not here for tea. You're standing at the edge of a pigeon loft, an odd cross between a shed, a shrine, and a bird-infested treehouse. The whole structure leans at a dangerous angle, built from teakwood, rope, and what looks suspiciously like parts of an old bed frame. Still, it holds. Inside, a man in his 50s greets you with a single nod. He's wiry, sunburnt, and wears a long kurta, stained from years of bird handling. His name, he tells you, is Murugan. And Murugan is a pigeon man. He doesn't train pigeons. He partners with them. Or so he claims. You duck into the loft, careful not to hit your head. The scent hits you immediately. Hay feathers. And that indescribable sour-sweet smell of pigeon poop aged to perfection under the Indian sun. Pigeons coo softly from their perches, occasionally flapping their wings or hopping between rafters. It's not chaos. It's choreography. Murugan shows you a simple crate lined with straw. Inside lies a young bird, sleek and gray, its eyes shimmering like molten copper. You're not sure if Panu means sun, victory, or nuisance, but he says it with enough reverence that you decide not to ask. He explains how each bird is trained. First, short distance releases. 1/2 mile, then 2 miles, then 5. But it's not just distance that matters. It's loyalty. Panu, for instance, always flies toward the eastern post, no matter what. No amount of bribery will make him go west. Another bird named Lalita prefers coastal air currents and sulks if made to fly inland. A third once refused to fly at all for 3 days after being startled by a peacock. Historians still debate whether pigeon homing is purely magnetic, olfactory, or something stranger, perhaps an inherited memory of terrain. One ornithologist from Oxford swore it was celestial navigation. Another blamed smell maps in the atmosphere. The pigeons, of course, never explained. They just flew. You crouch down beside Murugan as he opens a tiny wooden drawer built into the loft's floor. Inside are dozens of tiny rolled messages, scraps of cloth, fragments of telegram paper, even an old playing card with code written in charcoal. Each one tied with thread and stored meticulously. You lift one and find yourself holding a letter from a woman in 1871. It's written in Tamil, and from the few words Murugan translates, it's clear she was sending a final goodbye to someone dying. Delivered by pigeon. You're suddenly quieter. Murugan pulls out a small red pouch and gently ties it to Panu's leg. He murmurs something you don't catch, then opens the hatch. The bird flaps its wings once, twice, then soars into the sky, a gray blur swallowed by the afternoon haze. You walk outside and shade your eyes, watching the speck disappear. You ask. 18 minutes. Murugan replies. The message is going to a station over 20 kilometers away. You look around at the old bicycles, the rickshaws waiting in the shade, and the telegraph line drooping sadly across a pole eaten halfway by termites. Suddenly, Panu's flight doesn't seem quaint. It seems revolutionary. A small boy runs up with a basket of feed, and Murugan hands him a tiny whistle. Each bird has its own sound, he explains. He demonstrates blowing a strange trilling note that makes 3 pigeons cock their heads in unison. That one's for Lalita, he adds, as one particularly fluffy bird flutters down onto his shoulder like a diva making an entrance. You try the whistle. The sound you make is less musical. The birds ignore you. Don't worry, Murugan chuckles. They don't trust strangers. It's at that moment that you realize this is a whole culture, not just a hobby, not even just a courier system. These pigeon lofts, perched on top of police stations, fortresses, and merchant homes, are part of a secret architecture beneath the surface of the Raj. A feathered network, humming with unseen motion, like the bloodstream of a sleeping giant. There's even a kind of honor code among trainers. Birds aren't stolen. Messages aren't read. Some regions, like Pune and Trivandrum, have pigeon handler guilds that issue informal rankings and settle disputes. One story tells of a disagreement between 2 trainers about whose bird was faster. They settled it by sending each bird with the same message to the same destination. The loser had to feed the winner's flock for a week. Murugan pulls out a tattered journal. In it are hand-drawn maps of flight paths, weather notations, and records of every bird he's ever trained, alive or lost. Some don't come back, he says softly, but most do. You glance back into the loft. The birds are settling in for the evening, the light growing gold through the slats of wood. One coos near your ear, another hops beside your foot. And in that quiet moment, you realize you're standing inside the Victorian equivalent of a wireless router, except softer and hungrier. The sun dips behind the trees. Panu is still flying, somewhere over fields and forests, past watchmen and temple bells. A message is moving through the air. And you? You wait. You don't have to wait long. Just as the evening sky starts to melt into a muted peach, there's a sudden flurry near the edge of the rooftop loft. Murugan looks up sharply, shielding his eyes with one calloused hand. You follow his gaze. There. A fast blur of wings, sharp, purposeful, not flapping lazily like the village doves below, but slicing through the air with intent. Banu returns. He doesn't land right away. circles twice, as if double-checking that his world hasn't changed in the last 20 minutes, then drops clean onto the bamboo perch with a confident thud. Murugan doesn't speak. He moves like someone performing a sacred act. Unties the thread, gently unrolls the cloth. The message? Delivered. Correct station. Time-stamped. A local inspector even noted the bird's arrival in his ledger, with a remark that reads something like, "Still faster than train again." And that, my friend, is how trials began. Not in a grand military council, not by royal decree, but by enough men like Murugan quietly proving, one flight at a time, that pigeons could do what machines and messengers couldn't. You travel now with a British official named Harold Witherspoon. Harold has the general disposition of a wilting fern. His face is perpetually shiny, his shoes too tight, and he always seems slightly surprised to be outdoors. Yes, that's what they called it. You're in Bengal. The year is 1870-something, and it's raining. Harold stands under a waxed canvas umbrella, clutching a clipboard, while two Indian trainers release a trio of birds from a hilltop overlooking a flooded river. The birds launch, graceful, intentional, and gone in seconds. Now comes the waiting. You and Harold trudge down the muddy slope to a makeshift shed where a kerosene lamp flickers in the gloom. The shed smells of wet socks and boiled lentils. Harold grumbles about imperial efficiency while scribbling notes you suspect no one will read. You pour him tea. It helps slightly. An hour later, a runner arrives from the town, out of breath but grinning. All three birds. Landed. Messages received. He says between gulps of air. Harold looks stunned. The runner nods. Harold looks at his soggy shoes, then at the dripping ceiling. That's rather troubling, he says. Historians still argue whether Harold's report ever made it to London in full. Some suggest it was watered down, both literally and politically. After all, Pigeons didn't require British engineers, imported steel, or colonial telegraph stations. They required Murugans. And that made a few powdered wigs uncomfortable. Back on the field, the pigeon trials become increasingly formal. Timed races, marked destinations, sealed messages. Even pigeon passports, tiny leather bands embossed with the Queen's initials. You visit a series of hill stations, Darjeeling, Simla, Ooty, places where cooler air made British officers feel slightly less like melting candles. Each one has at least one pigeon handler, usually an Indian man with birdseed in his pockets and a notebook in his turban. The birds are logged, tracked, even given medals. One pigeon named Tamarind reportedly completed 12 flawless missions during the rainy season of 1875. He's still remembered in an old ballad sung by postmen in the Tamil region. You catch the tune one morning, low, steady, melancholy. Something about wind and wings, and a letter that arrived just before a wedding was called off. Tamarind may have saved a marriage, or ruined one. Hard to tell with poetry. By now, pigeon posts are appearing in corners of India the British barely understand. Tiny villages with no roads suddenly become reachable. Traders whisper about sending orders for spices and textiles without relying on bloated bureaucracy. Even one colonial governor starts using pigeons to get updates on his prize-winning mango grove. You wander through all this, amazed. Behind every pigeon flight is a network of people. Trainers, messengers, watchmen, each playing their part. It's not just birds being tested. It's belief and patience. Of course, it's not all success. One afternoon in Gujarat, you arrive at a compound where a pigeon was meant to carry an urgent letter between a shipping agent and the customs house at the harbor. The message was vital. A new shipment of silk needed to be redirected. The bird was released at noon. It returned at 3 p.m., alive, but without the message. No one knows what happened. Did the thread come loose? Was the note pecked off by another bird? One theory suggests a mischievous boy intercepted it mid-route with a slingshot and turned the note into a paper boat. Another story claims a rival trader paid to distract the bird with grains soaked in toddy. Whatever the truth, the message was lost. So was the shipment. And the shipping agent? Not thrilled. Failures like this remind everyone, pigeons are birds, not employees. They have moods, distractions, and occasionally grudges. You close the day watching a trainer pet a pigeon on the head while whispering to it softly. He's wearing a medal. You ask what it's for. He smiles. Saving a soldier, he says simply. And then, without another word, he whistles once, and the pigeon takes to the sky. By now you've heard the whispers. They're testing birds in Madras, someone said on the train. And did you hear? So you follow those whispers southward, toward the muggy coastlines and red dust fields of the Madras presidency. It's the year 1876, and things are starting to get formal. You find yourself in a clearing, not far from the Coromandel coast. Palm trees sway overhead. A line of white tents has been set up in a wide semicircle, with flags fluttering faintly in the breeze. There's a table covered in ledgers, tin kettles, biscuits that could dent your teeth, and a suspiciously neat stack of identical red message pouches. You've arrived at the government-sponsored Madras Pigeon Trials. You're greeted by an officer with too many buttons on his coat. His name is Captain Lionel Bexley, and he's equal parts skeptical and sunburned. You nod. He offers you a seat next to a local postmaster who's busily drawing flight paths on a map with a chunk of charcoal. The map, you notice, is stained with what may or may not be curry. Historical documentation has its flavors. The trials begin at exactly 10 a.m. A young Indian boy climbs onto a wooden crate and opens the first coop. Out shoot 5 pigeons, one after the other, wings slicing through the humid air. Each bird carries a numbered message to a different inland post, ranging from 15 to 40 kilometers away. A network of observers has been stationed at each point, ready to mark the arrival time and return the message by runner. You sip weak tea and wait. The first results come in by mid-afternoon. Bird 3 arrived in 28 minutes. Bird 1 in 35. Bird 5 didn't arrive at all. Later, it's discovered that Bird 5 made an unplanned detour into a fish market where it was distracted by shrimp and had to be retrieved from a pile of banana leaves by a very confused fishmonger. Historians still argue whether Bird 5's detour was a failure or simply evidence that pigeons enjoy a break too. The remaining birds performed admirably. Better, in fact, than the oxcart couriers used for comparison. Those took over 2 hours, and one reportedly got stuck behind a street parade involving elephants and paper lanterns. You smile. The postmaster beside you is beaming. You walk the camp that evening, noting the simple stations set up for the birds. Small shaded huts with water, feed, and padded perches. Each has a number, a chart of past flights, and a clipboard noting wind direction, cloud cover, and even nearby festivals that might produce unusual noise or smoke. One clipboard reads, "Delay likely." That night, over a dinner of lentils and a bread roll so dry it audibly crumbles, you hear tales of legendary birds. One named Kali flew during a storm and returned missing a tail feather. Another named Muthu once dodged a falcon and still arrived on time. And one bird, anonymous in every account, delivered a message to the wrong town, started cooing incessantly, and caused a clerk to open the message and reroute it correctly. Smart bird, or lucky, or both. The Madras trials last 2 full weeks. Each day, more birds are tested, more routes are logged, You watch as trainers whisper to their pigeons before each release like athletes before a match. There's reverence in it. Ritual. Some wear small tokens on chains, feathers from birds they've trained and lost. Not every flight succeeds. Some birds vanish entirely. Others return hours late, soaked and stunned. One reappears 3 days later with no message, but a small piece of red thread tangled around its leg. Murugan, yes, he's here too, explains that's often enough. The bird returning at all tells him what kind of skies lie between here and there. You watch him release another bird near dusk. It flies fast, low, hugging the treetops. You think of all the dangers out there. Snakes, cats, rival birds, small boys with slingshots, and of course, the weather. But the bird never hesitates. It flies as if it knows. By the trial's end, a thick stack of reports is bound and sent to Calcutta. The colonial government remains cautiously interested. There are murmurs of official funding, suggestions of a centralized pigeon post. Still, something has shifted. The Madras pigeon trials are just an experiment anymore. They're a message. And you, standing beside the last release crate, looking up at the setting sun as a final bird disappears into the distance, realize that maybe, just maybe, the sky isn't so silent after all. You're now back on a train, somewhere between Pune and Bombay, riding third class with a small collection of sweating soldiers, a goat, and what appears to be a very confused British missionary who keeps apologizing to the goat. The train groans as it climbs a narrow stretch of hillside track. You lean out the open window for a bit of air, only to be greeted by a puff of coal smoke and the unmistakable tang of hot metal. It's slow going. The engine wheezes like a man with a lifelong cigar habit, and you're fairly certain the goat is faster on flat terrain. But there's a reason you're on this particular journey. You're about to witness the day a pigeon, not just any pigeon, but a smug silvery bird with a dash of attitude, beat the mighty locomotive to Bombay. It started with a wager. Of course it did. A postmaster in Pune, after hearing about the success of the Madras pigeon trials, boasted to a visiting officer that his prize bird, named Sardar, could deliver a message to Bombay faster than the express train. The officer laughed. Coins hit the table. Bets were made. A crowd gathered. And you, because you have excellent timing, were handed a second-class train ticket and invited along as a witness. You meet Sardar the morning of the race. He's plump, confident, and sitting on the postmaster's shoulder like a co-pilot. The message is a short one. Message test. Pune to Bombay. It's tied in waterproof silk and secured with thread dyed red. At exactly 7 a.m., Sardar is released. At exactly 7:15 a.m., the train departs. Within 20 minutes, you're already behind schedule. A cow is sitting on the tracks. The cow, unbothered, eventually ambles off. You lose 7 minutes. Later, at a way station, a rail worker insists on checking all the coal logs manually. You lose another 15. Meanwhile, Sardar is gliding over hills, across rivers, and through air far less congested than yours. He doesn't stop for tea breaks. He doesn't wait for clearance signals. And he certainly doesn't care about station bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether this event was ever officially recorded, or if it remained a local legend bolstered by years of retelling and a fondness for birds with hero complexes. And the betting pool? Paid out in full. You arrive in Bombay sweaty, late, and a little embarrassed. At the central post office, a clerk shows you the message, still tied neatly to the pigeon's leg band. Sardar is resting in a basket nearby, being fed peeled grapes by a grinning young assistant. He didn't even break a sweat, the assistant says. If pigeons sweat. You're not sure, but Sardar does look awfully smug. The editorials are less amused. Common birds, you note, who don't stop for lunch. From there, pigeon races become a fad. Officers challenge one another. traders start timing deliveries. One eccentric naturalist tries to race a pigeon on horseback across a valley. He loses badly. You find yourself increasingly fascinated by the nuances. The birds are fast, yes, but only under ideal conditions. Rain slows them. Heat tires them. Strong headwinds send them veering. But they don't get stuck behind parades. They don't gossip at checkpoints. And most impressively, they come home. Always home. You visit another pigeon loft, this one tucked into the back of a British cantonment. It's a sturdier structure than Murugan's, lined with stone and iron bars. The pigeons here are clearly military grade, sleek, muscled, with feathers that shimmer like armor. Each one wears a tiny brass tag, numbered and recorded. The keeper, a dour Scotsman named McElroy, treats them like junior officers. He tells you the trick isn't just training, but routine. They like predictability, he says, pouring out seed. Same release time, same feeder. You ask about the longest flight one of his birds completed. 57 miles, he replies, through crosswinds and a dust storm. The pigeon's name? Agnes. You meet Agnes. She's older now, a little hunched, but with eyes as sharp as a bayonet. You believe it. Not all birds are so diligent. One failed flight involved a message falling mid-route into a farmer's well, where it was eaten by a goat. Another bird, confused by storm clouds, landed in a bakery chimney and arrived days later smelling like burnt pastry. And then there was the infamous two-pigeon collision near Surat, where two rival trainers released birds on intersecting routes, and chaos ensued. Still, even the failures add to the legend. You end your day watching Sardar perched atop the Bombay post office's highest point, surveying the city like he owns it. Below, the trains continue to huff, the carriages roll, and the telegram lines hum their electrical whispers. But up here, the sky remains silent, until a flutter of wings reminds you that sometimes the fastest path isn't built with iron or wire, but with instinct. You wake to a humid morning in Calcutta, the air already thick with the scent of coal smoke, overripe jackfruit, and bureaucracy. The streets are humming. Rickshaws creak over cobblestones. Vendors shout half-heartedly, and the British colonial heart of India stirs to life with all the urgency of a man reluctant to get out of bed. You're here for a meeting. Not with a governor nor a general, but with a banker. Because today you'll witness what happens when pigeons deliver the wrong message to the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. The building is a stone edifice with Corinthian columns and a name you can barely pronounce, etched in fading gold leaf. Imperial and Colonial Exchange Trust. Inside, men in starched collars and oil-slick hair bustle around holding ledgers, sipping tea, and looking vaguely annoyed at everything. You're ushered into a smaller room with green walls, ticking clocks, and a row of pigeon cages mounted along the back. It's quieter here. You can almost hear the flutter of anticipation, or indigestion. The banker, a man named Elliot Whitmore, leans across the table with a seriousness usually reserved for royal assassinations. You nod. Not really. But you're about to. Elliot explains the situation. The bank has recently begun using pigeons for intracity communication. They're faster than runners, more discreet than telegraphs, and charming in a rustic sort of way. The messages are simple. Currency rates, arrival times of cargo, stock updates. But one morning, a pigeon dispatched with an internal note on silver prices accidentally arrived at a rival firm. The clerk, who may have had a flair for melodrama, interpreted it as a sign of collapse. By mid-morning, a rumor had spread. Silver crashing. By noon, at least 3 clients pulled out investments. One wealthy widow fainted in the marble-floored lobby. and Elliot's mustache, you suspect, has never quite recovered. Historians still argue whether the incident qualifies as India's first pigeon-induced financial panic. Some blame the message handler, who allegedly tied the note to the wrong bird. Others whisper it was sabotage, a rival firm bribing the bird to veer off course, and a few claim it was simply pigeon mood, which you've come to learn is a very real phenomenon. The fallout? You follow Elliot to the rooftop coop. There, in a neat row, sit the culprits, 6 pigeons in brass-tagged cages, each with its own nameplate. One of them is Gertie. She's the one who went rogue. She's been grounded, Elliot says flatly. Gertie, for her part, looks unapologetic. You step to the edge of the rooftop and peer down. Calcutta unfurls below you. Wide boulevards, domed buildings, children chasing stray dogs. Somewhere in that mess, messages are still traveling. Some on foot, some by wire, and yes, some still by wing. Because despite the mishap, the bank continues to use pigeons. Carefully, selectively, and always with 2 messages sent. One with the bird, one by human courier. You later learn of other close calls. In one case, a shipment of tea meant for Bombay was rerouted due to a misread pigeon message, resulting in a boatload of Darjeeling arriving in Cochin, where no one wanted it, and half of it spoiled in the sun. Another time, a bird delivered news of a personnel transfer so quickly that the officer it concerned was waiting at the wrong fort before his orders were even officially posted. Still, you can't deny it. Pigeons remain impressively consistent. For every flub, there are 100 flawless deliveries. Murugan, yes, he's visiting again, says the problem isn't the birds, it's the people. They want birds to think like clocks, he says, chewing a sugarcane stick. Back at the coop, a handler demonstrates how messages are now double-checked, tied in waterproof pouches, and attached to birds trained on tighter, more predictable routes. You help release a bird. It flutters to the edge of the rooftop, hesitates, just a beat, and then launches. You watch it go, threading between rooftops, slicing past laundry lines and domed temples. Maybe it'll deliver its note flawlessly. Maybe it'll land in a bakery chimney. Either way, the city below continues to hum with the quiet miracle of old-fashioned logistics, some of it on rails, some of it by hand, and some of it soaring just above the noise, unseen and undeterred. The banker doesn't laugh. Neither does Gertie. You arrive next at a quieter town along India's southwestern coast, where the air is heavy with salt and sandalwood, and the wind carries hints of roasted cumin and distant thunder. You're not here for storms, though. You're here for a lesson in how to train a Victorian pigeon. Because while everyone's fascinated by what pigeons do, fewer people stop to ask how they do it. Or more precisely, how humans make them do it without tiny top hats, monocles, or bird-sized monocycle contraptions. You duck beneath a linen curtain and enter a courtyard behind a small temple. A dozen birds are pecking around in loose sand. An older woman, barefoot and calm as a quiet evening, is tossing a mixture of crushed lentils and powdered turmeric onto the ground. The birds flock to her. She doesn't say a word. You meet her grandson, Rajan, a boy with the smile of someone who knows secrets. He's about 15, sharp-eyed and eager to show off. Our family's been raising pigeons since before the British came, he says proudly, handing you a small cork-lined basket with 2 tiny scrolls inside. You do. Of course you do. Training starts early, Rajan explains. Chicks are fed only at a fixed place and time. No variety, no exploring, just one place to eat. Always. Over time, the birds associate home with that exact location. Smell, sound, light angle, the works. Next comes the call. Each bird gets a distinct whistle or sound. Some use bells, Some use names. And one trainer reportedly trained his birds using a wind instrument that sounded suspiciously like an off-key harmonium. Historians still argue whether musical training made the birds faster or just more dramatic. Yes, walks. Young pigeons are carried in small covered cages, step by step farther from home, first to the edge of the courtyard, then to the neighbor's roof, then half a mile away, released gently, encouraged. Observed. Birds that hesitate. Retrained. Birds that panic, given time. Birds that get distracted by shiny objects or loud noises. By the time a bird is deemed ready, it can fly 20 miles back to its loft, even if released from a moving cart, a treehouse, or once, from the top of an elephant in a wedding procession. That one arrived 10 minutes early. You sit under a shade tree as Rajan brings out an old folded journal. It's hand-drawn with maps and notes in Tamil and English. You see routes traced in thick charcoal. Market to station, station to fort, fort to palace. Each one includes a bird name, Chandra, Veli, Radha, and a little comment beside it. Wing favoring left. Got into fight with squirrel. You flip to a page with detailed training schedules. There's even a section on weather, when to release, when to delay, and what to expect if a bird vanishes into a sudden thunderstorm. Mama, nearby, his grandmother is now humming softly as she strokes a pigeon's neck. The bird visibly relaxes. You're starting to think pigeons are more emotionally intelligent than some of the British officers you've met. There's a lot of myth around training. Some say birds can recognize human faces. Others claim they can smell their home from miles away. A controversial French ornithologist insisted pigeons used low-frequency sound vibrations from the earth to guide themselves, while a British scholar published a paper suggesting magnetic fields were the real key. Rajan shrugs. Maybe both, he says. You watch as he releases a bird named Mira into the late afternoon sky. She lifts off slowly, circles once, then bolts toward the horizon with shocking speed. You can feel the air shift as she cuts through it. That evening, you follow Rajan into the loft. Inside, it's cooler than outside and smells faintly of dust, feathers, and something like coriander. Each perch has a nameplate. Each bird has its own little dish. It's not just order, it's respect. He points to a perch near the top. Empty. That's for Sita, he says. She's old now, doesn't fly. You cock your head. He whistles softly. From a shaded corner, a small older pigeon hops out and coos. Her feathers are frayed at the edges, and one eye is clouded, but she watches you. Directly. You sit down quietly beside her. Rajan smiles. Outside, crickets begin their nightly chorus. The air smells of jasmine and whetstone. You sit for a long time in the hush of the coop, watching the birds settle into their nests. Each one, a living letter, a memory with wings, a story waiting to fly. And all of it started with patience, repetition, and a boy with a whistle. It's morning in Bombay now, and you're climbing a narrow spiraling staircase inside an old colonial watchtower. Each step creaks under your weight, dust puffing up like a sigh from the past. You're sweating because of the climb, the heat, and the oddly intimidating silence of the officer leading you upward. This is no ordinary pigeon loft. You've been invited, by appointment only, to the headquarters of a classified military unit known as the Royal Bird Corps of Bombay. You weren't even sure this place existed. Rumors about it have circled for years. Elite birds, trained for high-stakes missions, reportedly used during frontier skirmishes, and even for surveillance. Some believe the Corps has birds that could memorize routes across mountain passes. Others say one pigeon once flew over 120 miles with a silk-inked code sewn into its leg band. You reach the top. A narrow landing, hot with early sun. The officer, Major Bennett, his name tag reads, stops at a reinforced wooden door, taps once in rhythm, then pushes it open. Inside is a pigeon loft like no other. The space is spotless. No bird droppings, no hay scattered on the ground, no smell of mildew or fermented seed. There's a faint whirring sound. 2 ceiling fans turning in opposite directions. Pigeons rest inside polished cedar cages arranged with military symmetry. Each bird has a nameplate and a brass serial number, and every one of them watches you. They're quiet, not a coo among them, as if they know, this isn't the place for small talk. These are the best, Major Bennett says, trained under silence, flown only by officers. You peer closer at a cage. She flew messages during the Malwa border conflict, the major says flatly. One run, 78 kilometers during a heat wave. Arrived 8 minutes early. You start to ask what kind of message it was. He gives you a look that says, don't. You take a seat beside a long table filled with rolled scrolls and small cloth envelopes. Diagrams show how to wrap silk messages into bands so they won't unravel mid-flight, even if the bird is attacked, or worse, falls. Historians still debate whether the Royal Bird Corps ever received official sanction from London. Some say it was a rogue experiment by a few field officers. Others claim there was a whole desk at the War Office marked Aerial Avian Operations that was later erased from records. The truth, as always, sits somewhere between whispers and wing beats. You're given a demonstration. The bird is blindfolded. Yes, blindfolded, with a tiny velvet hood. Part of the training, the major explains. The message is tucked in using a new method, sealed in wax between 2 sheets of linen, and then fastened by a miniature buckle. It looks fiddly, but elegant. Almost ceremonial. Milo is carried to a launch ledge, the hood removed, and without hesitation, he leaps. You watch him disappear into the Bombay haze, like a whisper into a storm. He'll be in Thane by the hour, Bennett says, checking a small brass timepiece. You're shown records, long tables with notations in fine script, names, distances, weather, arrival time, deviation reports. Some entries are smudged, a few torn, and one simply reads, MIA. Even war, it seems, has predators. One particularly dramatic entry catches your eye. Subject, Peregrine. Message, evacuation route compromised. Status, delivered under fire. Notes, tail feathers lost, wing bruised, survived. You meet Peregrine later. He's regal, slightly limping, and stands with the quiet confidence of someone who's seen worse and come out flapping. Bennett gives him a respectful nod. You're beginning to understand. These aren't pets. These aren't even just birds. These are soldiers. And like any unit, the Royal Bird Corps has its rituals. Every bird is assigned one handler. They eat at the same time daily. Their routes are practiced weekly, no matter the weather. And when a bird retires, they're given what Bennett calls full honors. A final flyover of their most common route, then permanent roost in a private garden just beyond the compound. You visit that garden. Dozens of birds live there, old and slow, waddling between flower pots, still respected by the younger ones. Hint, it's quiet in that garden. Sacred. And as you leave the tower, descending those winding stairs once more, you realize something has changed in you. You no longer see pigeons as background noise. You see them as ghosts of a forgotten army, carrying letters, secrets, orders, and hope across distances. Too dangerous, too unpredictable, and too delicate for men. You've left the stone towers of Bombay behind now, trading polished boots and brass numbers for sun-faded courtyards and a decidedly warmer atmosphere. You're in the court of a Maharaja, specifically a lesser noble from the central Deccan Plateau, where pigeons fly not just with military orders or stock prices, but with love letters, gossip, and the occasional encrypted insult. Yes, today you're stepping into the fluttering, scented world of pigeons, parasols, and espionage. The palace isn't grand in the British sense, no columns, no monocled butlers, but it breathes wealth, wide balconies, silk-draped windows, lotus-shaped fountains. The air smells faintly of rosewater, sandalwood, and, oddly, ink. Because this Maharaja, you quickly learn, is an amateur poet and a very serious romantic. You're shown into a shaded hallway where two young women sit cross-legged on a mat, painting calligraphy onto miniature scrolls using brushes so fine you can barely see the bristles. Their subject? A series of coded verses, messages of affection, protest, and occasionally strategy, meant to be flown out across the kingdom on the legs of pigeons wearing tiny beaded anklets. A servant offers you spiced milk and smiles shyly. You're unsure whether that's metaphor or job description. Out in the courtyard, a flock of white pigeons flutters lazily in the shade. Their loft is carved into the stone wall, flanked by climbing jasmine and shaded by ornate woodwork. Each bird wears a distinct ribbon tied to its leg, some blue, some gold, a few with delicate embroidery. Color-coded destinations, whispers a palace scribe. Gold for the southern estate, blue for the poet's circle in Pune. Her, you don't need to ask. You're introduced, briefly and formally, to the Maharaja himself. He's younger than you expected. Calm, but with that dangerous stillness that suggests layers. He gestures for you to sit. No one speaks for a while. Then, with a flick of the wrist, he motions to a handler. A pigeon is brought forth. A letter sealed with wax and jasmine petals is attached. The bird is held high and with no fanfare at all, released into the air. You watch it go. The Maharaja asks softly. You have no idea, but you nod anyway. Historians still debate whether such courts truly used pigeons for political maneuvering, or if tales like these are exaggerated by nostalgia and gossip. But you're holding a copy of one such verse now, delicately written, sealed, and addressed only with a single symbol, a half moon. Espionage by bird may sound whimsical, but you quickly learn it's taken seriously. Some messages are written in invisible ink, lime juice which only reveals under heat. Others are written in mirrored Tamil or coded using specific poetry meters only known to court insiders. You visit the message room, where scrolls are organized not by topic, but by raga, the musical scale that inspired them. One stack labeled Yaman holds dispatches about grain trade. One pigeon, named Sugandha, has flown so many political messages she's rumored to know the route to the British residency better than the Maharaja's own clerk. But the pigeons here aren't just silent messengers, they're witnesses. There's a story told around the garden. A spy, posing as a pigeon handler, once altered a route and caused a message meant for a friendly prince to end up in the hands of a rival. The fallout? You can only imagine how awkward that staff meeting was. You later overhear an argument between two attendants. One accuses the other of mistraining the birds, claiming his own pigeon went to the musician's house instead of the accountant's. The reply? Burn. The Maharaja's birds are pampered, yes, but not spoiled. Each undergoes strict weekly training, a flight path through the nearby ravine, a test landing at the hill shrine. One bird even performs tricks, flipping mid-air before diving home. The palace children adore it. But make no mistake, these birds serve a purpose. Whether carrying poetry or politics, their flights shape stories, alliances, and reputations. You witness one more launch before you leave. A red-ribboned bird. Message unknown. Destination undisclosed. The Maharaja simply watches it go, his expression unreadable. "She'll know what it means," he says. Again you nod. You leave the palace through a narrow gate that opens into a garden, the scent of marigold hanging in the air. Behind you, you hear the faint beat of wings. Up above, a white bird curves toward the sky, then disappears behind a wall of jacaranda. Somewhere in the distance, someone waits. And a secret travels through the air, carried not by code or machine, but by feathers and trust and a verse no one else will ever read. You're in London now. No, really. The year is 1878, and you've somehow found yourself perched, figuratively, thankfully, on a balcony bench inside the House of Commons, where the room is thick with dust motes, murmurs, and the unmistakable odor of warm tweed and old ambition. Today's session? A debate so strange, so wonderfully absurd, you'd almost think you dreamt it. Whether the British Empire should allocate funding to pigeons. It starts calmly enough. A member from Devon, red-faced and round, clears his throat and reads aloud a report from Bombay. The phrase causes a rustle of interest. One man sneezes. Someone else, possibly asleep, lets out a mild snore. You're sitting behind a young aide who whispers, "They think it's a joke." Sure enough, Major Arthur Braxton, stiff, medal-adorned, and carrying enough self-importance to fill a Zeppelin, rises from his bench and slaps down a folder. "Gentlemen," he says, "we have a choice." Gasps. Not from the argument, but from the word birds. It's not done to say birds in Parliament. Another MP, Sir Lionel Pratchett, scoffs so loudly it registers as a comment. "Birds, Major? What's next? Monkeys delivering tea?" Laughter. Polite, then cruel. The usual kind. But Braxton pushes forward. He references the Royal Bird Corps of Bombay, the Madras trials, and, brace yourself, even Sardar's train-beating flight. "Gentlemen, are we not men of reason?" A hush falls. For a moment, you think he has them. Then someone brings up the budget. Ah, the budget. Historians still argue whether the pigeon proposal was ever seriously considered. Some claim it reached the second round of review. Others say it was binned the same day, along with a motion to build a floating post office on the Thames. What is certain, though, is that newspapers caught wind of it. The article is surprisingly balanced. It points out the failures of overextended telegraph lines in Burma, the expensive upkeep of horse relays in Ceylon, and the pigeon-driven victories of Bengal. But the cartoons are not so kind. One shows Queen Victoria reading a letter off a pigeon's wing. Another depicts a mustached general being pecked into surrender by a swarm of messenger birds. Still, public opinion stirs. Letters to editors pour in, some mocking, some admiring. A few pigeon fanciers in Cornwall demand recognition. One man proposes a new uniform for postal pigeons, complete with tiny satchels. You hope he was joking. You're invited to a small salon that evening, hosted by Lady Pembroke, an eccentric widow with a fondness for exotic pets and politically risky conversation. One guest argues the future lies in copper wire and railways. Another recounts the story of Peregrine, the war pigeon of Malwa, and declares it a betrayal of honor to abandon the birds now. A young woman in a lavender dress quietly asks whether anyone's considered both. You nod silently. She may be the smartest person in the room. Outside, the night fog curls through lampposts and gaslights, wrapping London in soft gray hush. You walk through the city thinking about the absurdity of it all. This empire that prides itself on steam and steel, frozen now by the flutter of wings. And here's the twist. The argument never fully dies. Years later, even as telegraph wires tighten their grip across continents and under oceans, pigeons remain a quiet backup. In some colonial posts, a shadow network continues to operate. Birds roost above forts and train stations. Messages get sent. Unofficial, unrecorded, but real. Back in the commons, the debate drifts toward other matters. Tariffs, ships, a dam that may or may not exist. But as you glance back at Braxton, still seated, chin high, a small smile on his face, you realize something. He's already won in a way, because they didn't laugh him out of the building. They listened, and in that listening, the pigeons had their moment. A flutter in the history books, a page barely folded, but real and alive and still beating. You're high above the city now, on the slanted rooftop of a spice merchant's home in Surat, where two men stand with their sleeves rolled up, their hats tossed aside, and their tempers riding the breeze. The air smells of clove, sweat, and ego. Welcome to the strange, boisterous world of the fancier's rivalry, where pigeon racing has stopped being practical and started becoming personal. The man to your left, Mr. Rawal, is lean, hawk-nosed, and full of opinions. He claims his bird, Pushkar, is the fastest flyer west of the Yamuna. The man to your right, Captain Edmund Lacey, retired British officer, now full-time pigeon snob, believes his bird Geraldine is a marvel of aerodynamics and temperament, which is how you know he's insufferable at dinner parties. They've been bickering for weeks, and now it's time to settle things the only way pigeon fanciers know how. A rooftop duel. Not with pistols. Oh no, nothing so barbaric. This is a battle of feathers and flight paths, of pride and perfect glide ratios. You're the unofficial referee. The challenge is simple. Both birds are to carry an identical message from Surat to a small clock tower in Baharuk, nearly 60 kilometers away. Released at the same moment, under the same conditions, with watchers stationed at both ends. No tricks, no bells, no grain trails, just wind, instinct, and honor. You don't ask. At exactly 8:03 a.m., the two birds are lifted. Pushkar, small and brown with iridescent wingtips, flutters once, twice, and is off like a shot. Geraldine takes an extra beat, fluffs her feathers dramatically, then launches in a perfect arc. You can practically hear her humming the national anthem of whatever empire she thinks she belongs to. Now the waiting begins. You're served tea by Rawal's wife, who eyes the sky with more intensity than both men combined. Down on the street, children point at the sky, cheering for the brown one or the shiny one, depending on personal loyalty or snack bribes. Historians still debate how prevalent pigeon racing was outside official networks, but private races like these? Oh, they happened. Dozens were recorded in personal journals, some with bets so outrageous they'd make the East India Company blush. One story tells of a noble in Jaipur who lost a prized elephant over a pigeon race. Another speaks of a bet where the loser had to name his next child after the winner's bird. That child, apparently, was named Bubbles. Poor fellow. Back in Surat, tension climbs as the sun rises higher. The heat thickens. Rawal begins to pace. You receive word just past 9:40. A runner appears at the edge of the roof, waving a strip of red cloth, the agreed signal for message arrival. Both birds have landed in Baharuk. Messages intact. The time difference? 3 minutes? You wait. Rawal shouts. The runner catches his breath. Pushkar, he says, by 3 minutes. Silence. Then a roar from Rawal. His arms shoot into the air as if he's just won a war. Captain Lacey deflates, gently removes his hat, and nods. She must have overcorrected at the river bend, he mutters. Rawal is already feeding Pushkar crushed peanuts, whispering, You made me proud, my friend. That night, there's a rooftop celebration. Oil lamps flicker along the terrace. Spiced rice and roasted chickpeas are passed around, and someone brings out a sitar. Captain Lacey, begrudgingly sipping sweet tea, concedes that Pushkar has potential and offers to buy the bird for an outrageous sum. Rawal refuses. Of course. Later you find yourself sitting alone with the two birds, resting quietly in their cages, feathers gently rustling in the warm breeze. You think about the strange power these creatures hold, not just in war, not in empire, but here, on this rooftop. In pride, in rivalry, in joy. Somewhere far away a telegraph ticks, a train clatters over metal rails, but here, in the hush between street cries and soft music, two pigeons have stirred something deeper than utility. They've become symbols, not of power or victory, but of connection, identity, and the human impulse to care deeply, even about a creature with tiny eyes and a surprisingly smug strut. You lean back against the terrace wall. The stars are just beginning to show. And in the distance, a pigeon coos softly, as if proud to have been part of it all. You wake to the soft hum of wind over a plateau in Pune, where the air is cool, the sky a shimmering brass, and the rooftops stretch like the wings of sleeping birds. It's festival season. Lanterns hang from balconies, sweet sellers line the streets, and the scent of fried jaggery wafts from stalls. But you're not here for sweets. You're here for feathers. Because today the sky will be full, not with clouds or kites, but with pigeons. Hundreds of them. Carefully groomed, fed, and positioned for the grandest non-military aerial display in all of British India, Pune's ceremonial pigeon air show. This isn't a government operation. It's part cultural spectacle, part provincial pride, and part good old-fashioned competition between pigeon guilds. Yes, guilds, like blacksmiths or tailors, but with more cooing and significantly more droppings. You arrive at the open field just outside the city walls. Tents billow in the breeze, arranged in a circle around a low stage. An announcer in a kurta with gold trim adjusts his turban and taps the microphone, well, bell, because there's no electricity out here. Instead, the signal is given the old-fashioned way, with a burst of drum beats and a small cannon shot. Then the birds are released. You look up and gasp. It's not chaos. It's choreography. Dozens, then. Hundreds of pigeons rise into the air in waves, gray, white, dusky blue spiraling into the golden light. They turn in synchronicity, banking left, then right, then forming what might actually be a heart shape, though some argue it was supposed to be the map of Maharashtra. You glance at the crowd. Men cheer. Children gasp. The guilds have names like the Southern Flyers, the Indigo Sky Carriers, and, oddly, the Silent Thunder Feathers. Their banners flutter behind them. Each one is represented by a team of trainers, some barefoot, some in uniform, all watching their birds like generals reviewing a fleet. The tricks begin. One bird rolls midair, just once, tight and precise. Another flares its wings to catch a shimmer of sunlight, sending sparkles across the sky like a feathered chandelier. A group of 6 pigeons dive and reform in a perfect arc. Someone shouts, "That's Raghu's team." Historians still debate the origin of these pigeon shows. Some say they began as royal exhibitions for visiting dignitaries, others as harvest rituals. A few even believe they were a quiet form of protest, messages hidden in plain sight, passed during the grandeur. But today, it's celebration, and it's mesmerizing. The crowd grows louder as the finale approaches. Each guild selects one champion bird for the final show, the long glide. The task? Release the bird from a precise spot and have it land back on its handler's arm without veering, stalling, or getting distracted by, say, a hawk, a coconut vendor, or a wedding band. The first bird is Jaya, a sleek female with shimmering silver plumage. She lifts gently, catches the breeze, and coasts so smoothly you think she might be floating on strings. The second Modi fumbles the landing and ends up in a mango tree, looking faintly embarrassed. The last bird, Tansen, is a dark-feathered male with a red thread on one leg. His handler, a boy of maybe 10, whispers something before letting him go. Tansen leaps, not the highest, not the flashiest, but clean, intentional. You watch him glide, cut a slow arc, and then, with what can only be described as flair, land squarely on the boy's wrist. The field erupts in applause. Someone tosses flower petals. A drummer starts an impromptu rhythm. One old man, barely 5 feet tall, insists that whistling in D minor sharpens a pigeon's left turn radius. Another claims his birds perform better after hearing devotional chants. No one agrees, and no one minds. In a corner, a young girl strokes a pigeon on her lap. You ask if it flew today. She shakes her head. No, she says. He's retired. You kneel beside her and watch too. Above you, a few late birds circle once more before drifting down to their cages. The show is over. But the sky still carries the shape of wings. You stand as the sun lowers itself gently into the horizon, casting long gold shadows across the red dirt. And in that light, in the hush after celebration, you feel something curious. Not pride, not nostalgia, but reverence. Because for all the seriousness of messages and wars and couriers, here, pigeons are joy. Living art. A quiet language written in flight. A reminder that sometimes it's not about what the message says, but how it gets there. It's quieter now. The festivals have faded, the banners rolled away, and the pigeons, well, they still fly, but fewer, slower, with softer purpose. You've journeyed far inland, to a small sun-bleached village nestled against low hills and scattered tamarind trees. The monsoon is retreating, leaving behind damp earth and the last echoes of thunder in the distance. You're here to witness something simpler, something gentler, the last flight. His name is General Tilak, retired, of course, and he's waiting for you under the shade of a neem tree. A tall, silver-haired man with thick glasses and a calm that feels earned. He doesn't speak right away, just pats the spot on the bench beside him and gestures upward. There, in a modest coop made from weathered wood and loose chicken wire, lives the bird. He's the last of mine, Tilak says quietly. Name's Chintu, means little one. Chintu is old. You can see it in his feathers, duller now with patches of white creeping in around the neck, and in his posture, which leans slightly to one side as if carrying the weight of every mile he's flown. Trained him myself, Tilak adds. Used to run the northern routes, pre-partition, Manipur to Agra, 35 successful flights. You glance at the loft. Chintu blinks slowly. He's not in a hurry anymore. Today's mission isn't official. It's not urgent. It's not even necessary. It's a farewell. Tilak has written a letter, a real one, on aged stationery, sealed in soft wax and tied with gentle hands to Chintu's leg. It reads simply, "To whomever finds him, this bird has served. He's carried joy and grief and words too heavy for human hands. Treat him kindly." You watch the preparation with a growing tightness in your chest. There's something sacred here, not just in the ritual, but in the acceptance of age, of letting go, of knowing when to stop. Historians don't write about moments like these. There are no records, no headlines, no grand last flights marked with bugles or fanfare. Only quiet ones, personal ones, the ones that matter most. Tilak steps into the field, gently holds Chintu to his chest, whispers something only the bird will ever hear, and lifts him to the sky. You hold your breath. Chintu hesitates. His wings flicker, For a moment, it looks like he might not fly at all. Then, he rises. Not fast, not bold, but steady. Steady and certain. You and Tilak watch in silence as he curves over the tamarind grove, circles once, then disappears beyond the hills. He always liked that route, the general murmurs. You stay with him for a while, sipping cardamom tea that tastes like stories, watching the road for any sign of return. But Chintu does not come back. And that's the point, isn't it? Because this isn't a race, it's a release. There's a shelf of brass tags, each etched with a bird's name, date, final flight. He pauses at one. That one was Kiran, he says. Carried a message that saved a whole platoon. You ask if he'll train more. He shakes his head, smiles faintly. That evening, you climb a hill just outside the village, carrying a lantern. Below, the land stretches in golden charcoal tones, flickering with the last warmth of the day. No trains, no wires, just trees, wind, and the occasional rustle of feathers settling in for the night. And as the breeze kisses your cheek, you wonder, where is Chintu now? Is he resting in someone's loft? Perched on a stranger's windowsill? Or still flying, free from destinations, free from duty, carrying not a message, but the memory of all he's done? You'll never know. But you smile anyway, because not every flight needs to end with a return. Some are meant simply to lift and vanish. The museum doesn't even have a name. It's one of those dusty, half-forgotten buildings tucked behind a post office in an old cantonment town, the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were looking for something else entirely. The brass plaque at the entrance just says Communication Artifacts, which could mean anything from telegraph dials to dusty typewriters. You enter anyway, and what you find is a graveyard of wings. Welcome to the last chapter. Whispers from Forgotten Wings. It's dim inside. Cool despite the heat outside. The floors creak, and the air smells of lacquer and old rope. A fan whirs above you, struggling heroically. In the far corner, beyond the cracked glass cases holding signal lamps and rusted Morse machines, is what you came for, a pigeon display. Or what's left of one. You approach slowly. 3 wooden cages. Empty. Each one bears a rusted tag with a name and dates. The last one? No name. There's a placard printed decades ago, yellowed and curling at the corners. These birds served as part of colonial India's avian courier system. Trained from birth, they carried messages across provinces, over battlefields, and between palaces. Quiet, reliable, and brave. Most were never named. You exhale through your nose. Funny how a paragraph can feel like a eulogy. To your right is a faded map, pinned under cracked glass. Hand-drawn flight paths arc across the subcontinent. Red lines and feather symbols indicating now forgotten routes. Calcutta to Asansol. Bombay to Thane. Pune to the fort at Sinagad. Each one a silent thread once sewn through the fabric of empire. Inside, dozens of tiny brass rings, etched with numbers, some still holding fragments of parchment or wax. One even contains a curled scrap of silk, so delicate it crumbles slightly when touched. You don't. Above the drawer is a photo. Grainy, black and white, blurred at the edges. It shows a pigeon mid-flight, wings blurred, message visible at the ankle. No caption, no name. But you know. You know that bird once meant urgency, or hope, or farewell. There's a man sitting quietly in the far corner, the museum's caretaker. He's reading a tattered paperback novel, the kind sold in train stations. You ask if many people visit the pigeon exhibit. He shrugs. Not really. People like the radios, the Morse code keys. These birds? You nod, but you stay, because it feels like someone should. You glance around once more. A small clay bowl sits in the corner of the cage display, filled with seed. Dry, untouched, a ritual perhaps, or just habit. Either way, it's comforting. A whisper of care. Historians don't talk about this room. No glossy books, no documentaries. Just this. A few cages, a map, a drawer of tags, and memory. You step outside into the late afternoon sun, Naki. The street is loud again, scooters whining, vendors shouting, electricity buzzing through cables. Above it all, a single pigeon drifts lazily across the rooftops. Not fast, not official, just flying. You watch it for a long time. Then as the sun slips down and the sky begins to soften into a lavender hush, you walk away, slower than usual. Because you followed this story across miles and years, feathers and ink, jokes and heartbreaks. And now you carry it with you. Not because it changed the world, but because it quietly held it together. The sun has dipped behind the rooftops now. The sky fades from lavender to blue-gray, and a hush settles across the world like a woolen blanket draped across your shoulders. You close your eyes and feel it. That gentle quiet, the soft end of a long feathered journey. All around you, modern life clicks and glows and hums. But far beyond it, somewhere inside the warm folds of memory, a pigeon still glides through evening air, carrying a message too simple to need words. It says, you are not alone. That the distance between hearts has always been bridged by small quiet miracles. A note tucked in silk, a flutter of wings, a boy with a whistle and a pocket of seed. And that even now, in this age of instant everything, the old ways still echo. You imagine a loft perched above a railway station. Empty now, but once it thrummed with life. Feathers brushed wood, messages changed hands, a bird landed home, and somewhere someone smiled. You breathe slowly. In. Out. A pigeon coos in the distance, or maybe it's just the wind. Either way, it's soft, and it stays with you. Because tonight, you've journeyed far, not across continents, but through stories, through meaning. And now it's time to rest. So, sink into your pillow. Let your thoughts settle like dust in a quiet loft. Let your breath find rhythm. And let the night carry you, gently, silently, home.